Welcome to Swai Files. I am Swai. A man vanished. No trace, no sound. Only his police car left abandoned in the middle of the city, with the keys still in the ignition. He was a respected deputy sheriff with over 15 years of experience. But on a day in March 1971, he left the office as usual, and then completely disappeared from the world. Nearly 2 months later, he suddenly reappeared in Pensacola, Florida, under a different identity, with no memory of his strange disappearance. What happened during those 2 months, and who or what caused a man as capable as Krippin to forget everything? March 25, 1971, began like any other day. J.C. Krippin, the respected and dedicated deputy sheriff of Wing County, Louisiana, entered the office with his usual calm and focused demeanor. A man known for his discipline and responsibility, Krippin was the right-hand man to Sheriff Jordan, a symbol of trust within the department. But everything changed when J.C. suddenly disappeared while investigating a series of burglaries. On March 25th, at 10:45 a.m., Krippin walked into the office of a lieutenant in charge of auto theft investigations and had a conversation with him. During that time, he received a phone call, made some notes, gathered a few documents from the office, and left. He got into his unmarked car, and at 10:50 a.m., he informed the communications department that he would be sitting in his car for a while and to contact him there if needed. That was the last anyone ever heard from him. That afternoon, when Krippin didn't return to the office as usual, no one was initially alarmed. He could have been tied up with the investigation. But as the sun began to set and darkness crept in, unease spread through the department. Calls to Krippin went unanswered. More calls followed, but there was no response. The silence became increasingly unsettling. At 1:27 a.m., after a massive search by all available police in the area, his car was found in downtown Monroe, Louisiana. The car was unlocked, sitting at the corner of 4th and Washington Streets, with the keys still in the ignition. The sheriff insisted there was no way J.C. would leave his car like that. No chance. The search intensified, involving family, police forces, and even the FBI, who offered a $10,000 reward for information leading to his whereabouts. Hundreds of questions arose. Why would Krippin abandon his car like that? Where had he gone? Was he kidnapped, threatened, or was something else at play that no one knew about? On March 31st, the sheriff hired a criminalist from Shreveport, Louisiana, to assist with the investigation. They searched the white Pontiac that belonged to J.C. but found nothing unusual. He had been last seen driving with 2 people in his car, but this was not uncommon for a detective. The first thought that crossed everyone's mind in law enforcement was that he had been kidnapped and possibly murdered. J.C. wasn't married, but he had 4 children with whom he was very close. The sheriff knew this behavior was entirely out of character for him. The FBI, the sheriff, and every police department in the region were searching, and Krippin's photo was plastered everywhere. The case became a major news story. On April 8th, there were no new leads. The most significant news was that the person J.C. was last seen with, they had attempted to create a facial sketch, but believed it could have been a kidnapping. They were at a dead end. Another month and a half passed, and on May 30th, the sheriff received a call from J.C.'s son, Jimmy. Jimmy told the sheriff, a family friend, that his father had returned home. It turned out that J.C. had called home the previous Sunday morning at 7 a.m., saying that he wanted to come home, but didn't know how to get back to Winfield, Louisiana, where he lived. He said that for the past 17 days, he had been working at a gas station in Pensacola under the name Josh Allen. The sheriff mentioned that this was the same name as a suspect J.C. had arrested the week before he disappeared. The family advised him to take a bus from Pensacola to New Orleans, and they would meet him there. He arrived without any memory of how long he had been missing and told the family at 4 a.m. that he had called them at 7 a.m. and began to have memories and recollections of his past. He remembered his son's phone number. His children met him in New Orleans and brought him home. He said he had been in Pensacola, which is about 360 miles away, roughly a 5.5-hour drive from point to point. What was very interesting about this case was that this was yet another incident where a missing person was found in Florida. The sheriff had indeed sent someone to Pensacola to check the gas station, and they said, yes, Josh Allen worked here for 17 days. He was a great worker, nothing unusual, just said he was down on his luck and needed a job, and he simply showed up at my door. Another curious detail is that JC mentioned waking up at 4 a.m. and starting to regain his memories. It's similar to how people often have dreams about someone around that time in the morning while they're asleep. JC returned home after serving as deputy sheriff for 15 years without any prior issues. This was the first time anything like this had ever happened to him, and everyone was utterly perplexed. His department and family agreed that he needed to be hospitalized, and he was admitted to a hospital in Baton Rouge from June 7 to June 15. He stayed there for a week and underwent a series of tests. During the time he was missing, JC had lost a significant amount of weight, and during his stay at the hospital, they noted that he began slowly regaining weight. In a press release, they mentioned that JC had no memory of those 2 months, except for what he remembered about working at the gas station. He had no idea how he got to Pensacola, nor why he had left his car with the keys still in the ignition in Louisiana. It was all a blur to him. After a week in the hospital and undergoing extensive tests, they determined that he was healthy again. And of course, the sheriff had to access those medical records to ensure that JC was stable. On July 1st, JC Krippin returned to work as usual, but his disappearance remained an unsolved mystery. There were no further signs of that incident, and no similar events ever happened to him again. Krippin resumed his normal life, but the biggest question still lingered. What truly happened during those 2 months? And this disappearance was only the beginning of a series of mysteries. Ahead, strange dreams would continue to reveal deeper secrets, leading us into stories with no answers. Now, the next 2 cases are very intriguing for you. The first case happened in Florida, not far, just a little north of Pensacola and a little south of Montgomery, Alabama, on November 1st, 1935. These 2 cases will have similar endings, so you can start thinking about them. The first case involves a man named Al McGowan. On November 1st, 1935, McGowan lived near a local pastor named Reverend M.F. Harrison. The Reverend had known McGowan for some time and had made a deal with him to purchase a large trailer where he and his family could live. The Reverend and his family had last seen McGowan about 2 weeks earlier, and then McGowan disappeared. McGowan left no trace, as if he had been swallowed by the dense, mysterious swamps of the area where he lived. The entire village, including neighbors and relatives, was bewildered by his strange disappearance. Days of searching passed in vain, and all efforts to find McGowan seemed to hit a dead end. The search went on for weeks, but McGowan's whereabouts remained a mystery. Search teams scoured every tree, every patch of forest, and every stream, but there was no sign of where he had gone or what had happened to him. All they could come up with were speculations. It was a strange case, and no one knew where the answer lay. On December 6, 1935, Reverend Harrison woke up in the morning, leaned over to his wife, and said, "I had a dream that McGowan is in a swamp near our town, dead. And I can't get it out of my head." It turns out that the Reverend's wife and McGowan's sister were close friends. The Reverend said he had never had a dream like this before and felt uncomfortable telling anyone about it, as he wasn't even sure if the dream was true. However, the Reverend's wife shared the dream with McGowan's sister, who then called the sheriff and said, "We need to search the swamp out there." The sheriff agreed, saying, We'll take care of it." On December 8th, early in the morning, they found McGowan's body in the swamp. And what's remarkable is that the information about his whereabouts came from Reverend Harrison in his dream. The sheriff arrested Reverend Harrison as a key witness and brought him to the station. The coroner arrived and took custody of McGowan's body for an autopsy. You can imagine how this played out. In a straightforward world, people would have to think, maybe the Reverend isn't as good as we thought. Maybe he knew who killed McGowan, or perhaps he himself was the killer. The next case involves a man named Doyle Sr., aged 52, who went missing on January 4, 1943. This was another strange case. He was a Pittsburgh police officer who had served for 20 years and retired in July 1942. He was single, had no children, and his only living relative was his mother, Euphemia Bittner, 75, who lived in Pittsburgh. In August 1919, Officer Sr. received a call about a disturbance. He drove to the scene and was attacked and knocked unconscious by two men. Officers who arrived later arrested and convicted those men for attempted murder of a police officer. Sr. suffered a severe head injury and was off duty for 2 months. On December 14, 1923, while on duty, Sr. was involved in a scuffle with a 61-year-old man. He received a call that the man was drunk and causing trouble in his home, and the police were needed to handle the situation. Sr. arrived first, entered, and was immediately struck in the face with a whiskey bottle, causing him to bleed. Sr. had a baton, and during the struggle he struck the man on the head, rendering him unconscious. An ambulance was called, and both were taken to the hospital. The man who was hit on the head died, and there was a forensic investigation to determine whether Sr.'s actions were justified. In the end, he was cleared of any wrongdoing. In January 1943, Pittsburgh was covered in cold, snowy weather, but the atmosphere grew even more tense when Doyle Sr., a respected former police officer with 20 years of experience, suddenly went missing without a trace. Doyle was not someone who would easily abandon everything. After his retirement, he lived a peaceful life with his mother, Euphemia Bittner, his only remaining family member after his father passed away. Doyle was Euphemia's pride and her only source of support in her old age. But then, on a winter's day, Doyle left home like he always did. He put on his warm coat, stepped out the door, and from that moment, no one saw him again. When Doyle didn't return home that evening, Euphemia began to sense that something was wrong. At first, she tried to reassure herself that her son was simply out longer than expected. But as the night passed without any word from Doyle, she began to panic. With a mother's instinct, she knew something terrible had happened. Pittsburgh police quickly got involved. Doyle was not someone who would go missing easily, especially with his long experience as an officer. His friends and colleagues were stunned. He was a strong, steady man, and there was no sign that he was in any trouble. But after weeks of searching, no clues surfaced. Pittsburgh was engulfed in eerie silence, and all hope seemed to fade. In early February, amidst her despair and worry, Euphemia had a strange dream. In that dream, she saw her son Doyle floating on the Ohio River. His body was cold, still under the frozen water, with logs drifting around him. The dream was so vivid that she couldn't shake it from her mind when she woke up. She felt as though she had just been given a sign. The next morning, Euphemia immediately contacted Doyle's former colleagues at the police department. With her desperate plea, a search team was sent to the area along the Ohio River near the Emsworth Dam, exactly where she had seen in her dream. The search was not easy. The Ohio River was vast and freezing, with swift currents beneath a thick layer of ice. The searchers didn't have much hope of a positive outcome, thinking this was just a desperate attempt from a grieving mother. But they couldn't refuse Euphemia's request. Her eyes were filled with unwavering faith that her son was out there somewhere. And then, a month later, on March 10, 1943, Doyle Sr.'s body was found near the area Euphemia had described. The scene was chillingly similar to her dream. His body had drifted near the Emsworth Dam, his face cold and peaceful, as though he had been at rest for a long time. Doyle's death was not clearly determined, and the cause of death remained a mystery. There were no signs of violence, no visible wounds, and no clues as to how he ended up there. Everything seemed like an unsolvable puzzle. This event shook the entire community. How could Euphemia's dream have led to the discovery of her son's body? Was it just a coincidence, or had some supernatural force intervened, providing information no one else could have known? Many in the community believed Euphemia's dream was a gift from God, a message from the heavens guiding her to find her son. But there were skeptics. They questioned, could it have been mere coincidence? Or was there something deeper at play that we still don't fully understand? The mystery surrounding Euphemia's dream only added to the enigma of Doyle Sr.'s case. Like the disappearance of Al McGowan, this story raised questions about the nature of dreams and whether people can truly receive messages from an unseen realm. And if so, who is sending those messages? And this is where the story leads us to a conclusion. These strange events aren't just about disappearances and dreams, but also a reminder of the importance of mental health, sharing, and helping one another in life. Sometimes dreams are not just fleeting images, but may serve as bridges that help us find what's important, whether that's the truth or even ourselves.